do.
We're up a little loud.
So what we're asked to do is kind of give you guys a cookbook for the process. Not so much what we did operationally, but what were the steps that we took to get the team together to take a goal and turn it into reality. Thank you. Let's go.
How about that?
Okay, so Brian joined us as the nursing director just last summer.
7 months.
Yeah, 7 months ago. And before that, we had an interim, and before that, we had an interim, and before that, we had somebody that was unpopular, and before that, we had somebody that was there a short amount of time. You get the story. Pretty consistent. We had, on the provider side, we were only seeing about 1.5 patients per hour. We were overstaffed and inefficient. We were short docs, so 60% of our clinical hours are PAPs. We had a lot of overtime costs because the PAPs, just because as the volume went up or because of our inefficiencies, we rolled out the EMR. We were spending a lot of overtime costs. The EMR dropped right at the same time we opened our new emergency department. And there was a lot of happy memories about the old days. Gosh, we were so much more efficient and everything's worse now. And so that's kind of the background on the provider side. On the nursing side, basically it had been driven, and I was part of this, that the previous nursing directors and I made decisions from the top, and we just drove it down. This is how it's going to be. This is the next greatest idea. This is what you need to do. And there was a lot of resistance to that, and we're making a lot of operational changes. Stuff was changing all the time, driving people crazy. The authoritarian versus team collaborative model. The impression was that the staff was at a level where they needed to be directed, that they weren't able to be engaged, and so that was the tactic that we were taking. And basically we've got nurses that were born in Reading, went to school in Reading, went to nursing school in Reading, and worked in one hospital, and that's all they know. And so that was a big problem because we'd say, there's a better way, or we can do this better, and there was resistance there. I think this is me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So basically, the big cultural shift we made once Brian came on board is that basically we're one team. The providers and the nurses, the leadership is aligned. We listen to each other. We take into account each other's goals and objectives. Brian was a positive leadership change. The previous director was really, the meetings will continue until morale improves. That was kind of their motto. And then we created a position called the clinical supervisor, which is pretty novel. We got rid of the team leaders. All the team leaders went away. We hired management to be team leaders. And we actually had them in the team leader role. So they're non-union, management people, extensions of Brian that became our team leaders. And what happened was, instead of breaks and lunches being the priorities, getting patients in beds and staffing the department was the priority. It was a big change overnight, just like that. And it took a while for them to actually be the team leaders. Now, we've elevated one up and we brought the team leaders back. So now there's a team leader that's staff and a clean soup that's physically there in the ED. So it's almost like having a nursing director in the department 24/7. It's really changed our operation. So that's been really important. And then the last thing is we went up to Roseburg. Was a medical director up there. You may have heard him, named Wade Fox. And he came up with this, basically this team care model where they had 2 nurses and 1 tech for every 8-bed section. And in Oregon, techs can start IVs and in California they can't. So we went to 3 nurses for 8 beds. And for you nursing directors, that sounds pretty rich. But we got rid of our break nurses. So that pod breaks themselves, and in that 3-person pod, there's a team captain, and they're the one that's supposed to expedite. Hey, where's that urine? I see that lab's out back. How come this guy hasn't gone to CT? And that really helps, keep things moving.
So for the foundation setting and getting everything lined up, I'm all about systems and processes and breaking things down and exploring everything. And so when we first started out, and this collaborative is an example of it, a lot of times you'll have a direction that the physician group wants to go in, and you'll have a direction that the hospital groups want to go in, and you're bombarding all of the staff with all of these different goals and everything. And we talked about that yesterday, that staff can concentrate on like 3 to 5 goals, and that's it. And you have way too many action steps, you got way too many things coming at the staff, and it's really difficult for them to concentrate or even to achieve anything that you're trying to do. And so strong leadership alignment, the first thing we did, Dr. Wells and I, is we got together and said, hey, what is it that we want to do? And what are the action steps that we want to use in order to get there? And I think that that's really important. In order to achieve something, everybody has to be absolutely on the same page. We created an interdisciplinary partnership council. What that was is a council of not only nursing, not only the providers, but it has registration, radiology, laboratory, security, everybody in the emergency room that is involved in any process that we put together in the department. With that, we communicated priorities. We talked about the goals of the things that we wanted to achieve, and then we broke those things down and started talking about action steps. So planning communication, that's also a big piece of it too, because we talk about how staff, providers, and everybody want to be communicated with. That's something that you don't do after you implement. It's something that you have to plan ahead of time. You have to know how you're going to communicate, and the way that you know is you ask everybody how they want to be communicated with. And then walking the process with the team. You know, you walk it, you mock it, you implement it, you measure it, and then you make improvements on things as you move along. And then the formal education with the providers, that's really the first step, is the formal education. But no matter how good you do something, which we found out as we go, you can have a really good plan, but you have to modify as you move. So this was our defined aim statement when we first started this process, which in Dignity we measure in averages. So we wanted a or a turnaround time to discharge in less than 170 minutes by December 31st, and then with a stretch goal of 150 minutes by June 30th.
Just to mention that, we really set long-range goals, and that's kind of one of the keys to our success. Rather than looking for the short-term successes and want this done by next week, we said, okay, we're going to march this out, almost a year in terms of where we want to be.
And so this is our process flow map.
So this is where it started. So in terms of the cookbook, the leadership team, so Mary Whitmore, who's our lead PA, Brian and I went into an empty classroom in the hospital with a dry erase board, and basically I got up there and I said, look, this is what has worked for us in the past, and this is our layout, and we looked at, this is the physician staffing, how many hours, the PAP staffing, how many nurses for each section. This is, we used to call the team leaders pod bosses. Essentially, we just spent probably an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, just basically going through it and coming up with the plan.
And so after we came up with the plan, we started defining the action steps. And this is something that we did again with the IPC as well, and looked at the action steps. Anytime you have a goal, you have to come up with your measures, you have to come up with your action steps on how you're going to carry it out, give you process measures, your outcome measures, your balance measures, things that you're going to look at as you're moving through your process. And so just really quickly, not spending a lot of time on this slide, we looked at ways that we would handle the patients when they come in at the front door. Our intake process of how patients are, mixing lower acuity patients with higher acuity patients. Everybody knows that if you throw a low acuity patient in a high acuity bed, their length of stay becomes exactly the same as what the high acuity patient is. And so you want to avoid doing that. So these were just some of the things that we put together in our process. In implementation, again, we walk the process. That's actually a really important piece. When you first go out, you walk it. Then we mocked it. And so when we mocked it, we actually took staff members and they became patients. We registered them. We took them into the rooms. We did the entire interview with them the same way that we would do with any patient. We documented in the medical record to see what it looked like. And so we wanted to try to catch as many of the pieces through the process that we could when we did it. Provider and nursing management on deck for the rollout. I think that's important. It's not just for the rollout, but it's rounding it. Most of the education that we did was after we implemented the process, because you're always going to find a few staff members who weren't quite convinced of why you were doing something, and so they're always trying to gravitate back to the old way of doing things. And so you're constantly giving them information of the why, and the why is never given in one time. It has to go over time.
Just to jump in there, one of the defenses that our nursing staff used to use, well, nobody told me about this. Nobody told me about this. And and there would be emails, whatever. Our nurses wouldn't read their emails. They said, we're not going to read our emails unless you pay us to read them. Yeah,
Right.
that was the culture. We're not going to read unless you pay us. So then we put up these like flipboards in the things so they could flip through it like the old days. So one thing with this IPC was that all the nurses on IPC had a phone tree, and they personally called every nurse on their phone tree so that there was a nurse-to-nurse communication about the plan to the entire nursing staff. And that defense, you couldn't say if you didn't know, because, so-and-so called you and told you all about it.
Yeah, and capping onto that too, the information that's rolled out, you're also getting information back by that route too. So if anybody has any input, you're getting it all the way to the front line, all the way back. So it's very beneficial in the process.
Well, the interdisciplinary council, I think, is really important because, again, instead of a top-down, so the leadership team came up with the idea, and we brought it, to the factory workers and shared it with them and what the goals were, and then they were the engine that basically talked to their peers and got it going. And that was, I think, the big difference between failures we've had before and successes that we've had this time.
Right. Yesterday, sustainability was mentioned, and so this group right here, it's the flywheel concept. Once you get that flywheel moving, it's going to start driving itself, and that's what happens right here. When you get ownership of a process, our IPC has a chair that's a staff member. They chair that committee. When I attend that committee, I'm there like the internet. That's it. I mean, if they have questions, I'm there for questions, but they drive this committee. So sustainability over time, they own the goals. This is posted in our break room. All of these are our goals, and those are the results, and we post the results every month so that everybody understands what's going on. I think that was mentioned yesterday too. Can you go to your staff on your unit and ask them what you're working on? And so everybody should be able to speak to not only what you're working on, but what are you doing personally to achieve those goals? And I think that's how you sustain over time. And so this is our measurements thus far. We rolled this out on October the 23rd, and then after October 23rd, you can see the overtime. You can see the big drop, but I think one thing to note on this slide here, though, is that our meeting when we drew that grease board drawing, that was in July. We didn't just come out and implement this and jump into it. We had a long, coordinated planning process before we decided to go live. Because in my past experience, if you go live with something, you're constantly throwing new things, and you don't have a really good plan on how you're going to sustain it over time, that's why it ends up going back to the same old thing. So you got to make sure that you try to see as much of it ahead of time as possible before you implement it. And so we still have a ways to go to sustain over time, but we got some pretty decent results to start off with.
So lessons learned, so I tried to make an operational change one time where I said, today, right now, we're going to do this things differently and change the process in real time. And that didn't work, surprisingly. So the single message is that you really have to see this, and it's hard because we're impatient. As nursing directors and emergency physicians, we want results now. And you just can't get results now. You're going to have to see the team, spend a lot of time on the front end to get payoff in the back end. Question?
Oh, come on, there's gotta be a couple questions back there. I thought there were a lot of really neat ideas that came up. Any questions? Anyone shy? Rick?
How did, I take it that your nurse staffing got much richer. How did you sell that to administration, et cetera, to change the ratios that you were practicing?
Well, actually, when I came into the hospital and I found out that their initial staffing was 3 nurses to 8 beds, I was like, right on, So that was, and we do need an additional now because we're, as we move through this process, we've modified the way that the beds are being handled right now. But from a productivity standpoint, that's really how you have to address it. So, your productivity is what your productivity is. And so when you build your staffing plan, you're going to have to make your case in front of finance that, this is my projected, units of service per day. This is what you budgeted me. These are the hours working on. This is my plan on how I'm going to staff that unit. And so you make your case and then you live by it as it moves on.
And And this is where a field trip was important, because our chief nursing officer came with us when we went up to Roseburg to look at their model, and she was like, yeah, I wanna try this. So that, that's some of the top cover that we got initially to get that staff in. And by eliminating the break nurses, it was pretty close to the number of bodies we had in the department already.
Yeah. And success will fuel that over time too. So if you start showing really good numbers and you're not having a major impact, going up in budget and everything, that's gonna fuel things as well.
Marty?
Well, I think you answered my question, Jesse. I was gonna ask about the involvement of the C-suite and the importance of having them sort of covering your back on some of these difficult operational changes.
Yeah, going to the team care model was really important. The CNO saw it, saw the results. When we went there, I think they shuttled all the patients out of the lobby and hid them somewhere because there was nobody in the lobby. So it really, it was a good visit. And I think the site visit, your naysayers, particularly, we picked the nurses that we thought were going to be the toughest to sell, brought them with us in the van, drove up to Roseburg and let them see it, and that helped a lot.
It's a great strategy. I think we really need to win over. Yeah.
Down in the weeds, you had the telephone callers, and sometimes my experience with that is you've got your great people who will always do it, and then your people who never follow through. How did you get the whole team of the telephone tree going?
So when we implemented the Interdisciplinary Partnership Council, we actually built a tree, and each one of the nursing staff, it's not just nursing staff, all of the staff that are in there have 4 to 5 people that they're personally responsible for. And we looked at this in July. We had our first IPC meeting in July, and we practiced that before we decided to go live with it in October. And so, we wanted to make sure that communication was working and everything. As far as getting everybody on the same page, you build your champions with that team. Generally, you've got your high performers, your middle performers, and your low performers. The middle performers will normally gravitate towards the emphasis. I don't believe in concentrating on the 20% or spending a high amount of time on low performers that aren't there. I concentrate my time on the people that are doing a good job so that I can constantly pat them on the back, because that motivates them to continue going. And generally, staff will gravitate in that direction. So that's how we've done it so far. It's working really well.
My compliment was very nicely done, by the way. And you're in the middle, almost. You're kind of in sustaining the gain, or continuing the momentum of your flywheel. This is unfair because this is not yet done. But
right.
How do you plan to now institute all the changes that you're thinking and planning here into this current process?
So I didn't get to bring all of the goals, but when we first started talking about the goals, we talked about the entire plan. This is part of an implementation over time. So the emergency department visit is the beginning, middle, and end. And so we had a strategy that we decided that we wanted to do throughout the entire process. And so we decided to get this hardwired first, move with it because it was something that we felt that we could have initial gains with, have really good success with, build the confidence of the staff and get them motivated. And when we start moving into the more difficult things like hourly rounding with intent, team discharge, which we're already doing a little bit now, modifying the team assessment and getting better at it, and then really looking at that turnaround time to discharge. Most of our success right now is on the front end, so we want to start succeeding on the back end. And when we speak to staff now, we tell them, this looks difficult, but look how good you did on this already. So there's no reason to think that we wouldn't be that successful. Yeah.
My short answer to that is each next initiative is easier because we have kind of this lattice work already established. So now it feels like we can just add the next thing on. At least that's what we hope.
We worry about are you going to change where that's how to
That's a good question.
Just a quick question about your clinical supervisors. Are they 24/7, and do you still have charge nurses?
We do have a TL, so we have a clinical suit who manages the operations, and they are pretty much 24/7. They'll cover about 20 hours, and then we have a TL that does like the charge nurse duty, and then the pod captains are like mini charge nurses, so they're in charge of their little group with their 8 beds. We eventually want to, we're not as good at it as we could be right now, but the pod captains are really going to drive the flow. And And so that's what we want, is a big collaboration with that team and everybody to have outlined responsibilities.
But Brian has to count those clean soups in his productivity as well, so that, so basically those still count against him, so to speak, for productivity wise, so. But, I mean, it's great having management in the department, have those great conversations. One of the culture issues we had is that physicians and PNPs were enforcing the professionals of nursing. Nobody in the department was saying, how come that patient isn't undressed? Why didn't you get that antibiotic hung? There was no nursing leadership doing that in the department. And so by default, the providers were, and that creates tension. We should not be enforcing the standard of nursing professionals. That should be responsibility of the nursing leadership. And so now with the clean soups there, we're seeing much more interaction with the staff, coaching, counseling, those types of things.
Your question?
Yeah, question. So you said that you brought in a new EMR with this. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and sort of measures that you.
Yeah, that was kind of right before this, and that was like the nail in the coffin, And I mean, normally when you open a new ED, you get a boost of market share, and we timed the EMR at the exact same time we opened the new ED, so we got no boost in market share, and our numbers went crazy. We were way overstaffed because we did that intentionally because we were worried about the productivity. So our hourly dropped like a stone. Our productivity was horrible. The patient experience was bad because nurses and providers were struggling with the new system. So that really was a big hit, and we haven't recovered.